Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
This is Kinda Murdery Insomniac. Stories to stay awake by. Good evening, Insomniacs, and welcome to Kinda Murdery Insomniac. Stories to stay awake by. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to be here. Before we get started with tonight's tale of brutal violence and familial rage, I'd like to say an extra special thank you to Darren Marlar from Weird Darkness, and to any members of the Weird Darkness Weirdo family who may be joining us. We're so honored and grateful to have you here. And wherever else you may be from, or if you've been with us all along, please know that Kinda Murdery is ride or die with you, too. Lastly, I'm in the Kinda Murdery woods of Tahoe, California for my daughter's spring break. And I've forgotten my pop shield, but there's no way out of this snowdrift. So if you hear me breathing heavily, maybe it's the details of the story, or maybe it's no pop shield. Thank you for your patience. One last thing before tonight's main event. I'd like to share with you a frightening, freezing, paranormal experience that I had during the blizzard of our first night's arrival in Kirkwood, California. Please note, this is audio verite. It was recorded in real time on my iPhone from inside the freezing cab of our rental car.
I'm sitting in a Kirkwood, California snowdrift. The two-wheel drive Mazda CX-Z was not equal to the task. It's getting very weird and dark, and frankly, kinda murdery, and colder, and colder. And I'm wishing now that I hadn't turned the car off, when suddenly I hear the sound of snow crunching beneath giant, bare feet. Is it the Sasquatch? Is it the Bigfoot? Is it the Yeti? Is it the abominable snowman? Honestly, even if it is, as long as he's warm, I just might give him a hug. This is Zevon Odelberg, signing off. Hopefully, not for the last time.
Now, Insomniacs, in the interest of honesty and transparency, I will share with you that those footprints did not belong to the abominable snowman. It was merely my grand uncle in snowshoes come to rescue me from the drift. But I am a child of Humboldt County, home to the legendary Bigfoot, and I promise you that the fear I felt was as real as I know the Sasquatch to be. And now, on to tonight's main event, a hideous recounting of a misnomer most foul. I give you the Nice Stabber. When a man lives in a trailer with his lover and her husband, one might expect him to be the victim, not the murderer. Or at the very least, it would be one of the three sides of that blighted triangle that found themselves murdered. That's what you'd assume. Not so in the story I'm about to tell. This is a tale ripped from the pages of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat that spans the towns of Nice, California in Lake County, which in this instance is better named Not So Nice, California, and Ukiah, California in Mendocino County, home to the awfully compelling and just plain awful murder of Frida Nash from Sunday's episode featuring Darren Marlar from Weird Darkness. I bring you a tale of familial rage from 1986. As always, now is your chance to duck out, turn off the show, and remain comfortably wrapped in your fragile illusions that mankind is fundamentally good. I'll wait. Still with us? Excellent. Here we go. The town of Nice in Lake County, California, was formerly known as Clear Lake Villas until it was renamed in 1930 after Nice, France, the original hometown of founding father Charles William Bain. Nice sits on the shores of the famed Clear Lake, and I imagine the locals call the California version Nice. So that's what I'll do here. We begin tonight's story with a woman named Joyce Simpson, a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Upper Lake, who ran what she called a, quote, guest home for the elderly, essentially a retirement home, next to a small house occupied by William Corliss Horn, 63, and his wife, Bernadine Ruth Horn, formerly Bernadine Ruth Vian, 60. In the town of Nice, California, at 4:20 a.m. in the wee hours of the morning on Tuesday, June 17, 1986, Mrs. Joyce Simpson awakened to the sound of a woman's blood-curdling screams and repeated sobbing cries for help. Joyce Simpson, showing admirable courage, did more than call the police and cower in her home until they arrived. Instead, she boldly flew into the dark, murderous night to answer that desperate, screaming, crying woman's voice, the one that had awakened her. She quickly found her neighbor, Bernadine Ruth Horn, lying in the side doorway of the Horn home, sobbing, covered in stab wounds and blood, critically injured. When Joyce asked Bernadine if she knew who had done this to her, Bernadine answered simply, "Steve." When police and paramedics arrived, Bernadine was taken to the intensive care unit. Her husband, William Corliss Horn, was found in the house. He too had been viciously and repeatedly stabbed. But unlike his wife, William Corliss Horn was already dead. Which brings us to the obvious question: who is Stabbin' Steve? Forgive me for glibly nicknaming a murderer. I would offer my apologies, but also a simple reminder. You are listening to Kinda Murdery Insomniac, stories to stay awake by, and while I shall always endeavor to remain respectful, it's also important to remember that people of good conscience process the world's horror in different ways, and sometimes a touch of dark humor might be just the lifeline we need. While on the other hand, outrage and stern statements of condemnation, no matter how justified, act less like an emotional life preserver and more like a pillowcase full of bricks. You know your own heart, and you don't answer to the howling mob of homogenized morality, and public protestations of virtue often leave this insomniac wondering if the proverbial lady doth protest too much. But back to our story. In 1986, Nice, California was home to Bernadine Ruth Horn, 60, formerly Bernadine Ruth Vian, who lived with her husband, William Corliss Horn, 63, and her son, Steve T. Vian, 24. They lived in a small, white, one-bedroom house on Crump Avenue in Nice, California, a house with immaculate pink shingles that they were trying to sell. The Horns had been married for about 6 years. Stephen had gained a new stepfather at the age of 18. 3 years prior to that, Bernadine Horn had inherited a tidy sum of $300,000, which she told her son she was leaving him in her will. Perhaps sharing that information with her offspring was a mistake, but since Stephen was an only child, were he inclined to murder his mother for money, it's likely he assumed he would inherit. Now every story needs an inciting incident, and in the case of the nice stabber, perhaps that incident was the inheritance, or the moment Stephen found out about the inheritance. Perhaps it was the fact that the Horns were trying to sell their home. Perhaps it was just two parents who decided that their 24-year-old son was too old to be living at home in a one-bedroom house with his mom and stepdad. Whichever of those reasons, or perhaps all of them combined, was the first domino to fall, we cannot know for certain. But the true inciting incident likely occurred when the Horns told Stephen there was no longer room for him in their house. They kicked him out, and no matter how old, and particularly when a step-parent and a large sum of money are involved, a son is likely to feel his mother's rejection keenly. At his parents' urging, Stephen moved to Ukiah with the stated intention of attending Mendocino Community College, but instead, he wound up moving into a trailer with his girlfriend Teresa Peterson and her husband. Insomniac declines to speculate on how or why exactly that worked for them. A family friend, Lucy Anderson, pointed out that Stephen was jealously watching his mother and stepfather spend what he considered to be his. Remarking to Anderson when Mr. and Mrs. Horn took a trip to Hawaii, Stephen said, "They're spending my inheritance." Later, Teresa Peterson would tell the jury that Vian told her the day before the murder that if, quote, Bill, that's Stephen's stepfather William Horn, keeps spending my money on his coin and stamp collection, I'm going to effing kill him. Also, the day before the murder, Stephen went to his mother to ask for money, telling her the money was to buy food for Teresa Peterson's babies, who were Peterson's husbands and not Vian's. His mother told him that while she had loaned him money in the past, she couldn't do it anymore, but that he could ask her husband, Bill, for the money. Bill, unsurprisingly, refused. That same day, Peterson's husband loaned Stephen $3 for gas money. Oh my. Insomniac imagines that for Stephen, the humiliation was acute. That night, in the wee hours of the morning, wearing socks on his hands, Stephen Vian broke into his parents' house, grabbed a butcher knife from the kitchen, attacked Mr. and Mrs. Horn as they slept, and viciously murdered his stepfather, while very nearly murdering his mother. Within a couple of hours of William Horn's murder, portions of Horn's gold coin and stamp collection were found in Vian's car. Initially, Stephen Vian would plead not guilty to the murder of his stepfather, but once his mother recovered from the intensive care unit, Bernadine was prepared to testify against him. And facing such overwhelming evidence of his guilt, and perhaps more to the point, facing the death penalty if he were convicted, Stephen Vian would change his plea to guilty in exchange for life in prison without the possibility of parole. Of course, we also wonder why a killer kills, not just who or when or how, but especially we wonder why. In Vian's case, he wanted money, but bad enough to stab his own mother? He wanted gold coins and stamps? We suppose the answer is yes. And yet, was that all that was going on in Stephen Vian's mind? In what seems to this insomniac to be a case of broken psychological justification, Stephen Vian had convinced himself that his parents, in particular his stepfather, deserved to die. Bill Horn with his coin and stamp collections, the stepfather who hadn't arrived in Stephen's life until Stephen was 18 and therefore was never more than an interloper, the man who stole his mother's affection, kicked him out of the house, and was now effectively stealing his money, the same man who wouldn't loan him a penny to feed his girlfriends infant children. Stephen no doubt convinced himself that he broke in to murder his parents with a butcher knife that June night in 1986, not just because he wanted, no, he needed money, but to avenge years' worth of slights, injuries, and wrongs done him by his mother and his stepfather. That's why he was robbing them. That's why he was stabbing them. Maybe not. In fact, it was revealed at Stephen Vian's trial that there were 2 prior felony convictions in Stephen Vian's very recent past. In October 1982, Vian was convicted of second-degree burglary, larceny, forgery, and grand larceny in Knox County, Tennessee. In 1984, he was convicted of escaping from jail in Davidson County, Tennessee. So perhaps this was less a case of a man horribly avenging himself upon parents who were spending his future on collectibles, as he no doubt believed, and more a case of an inveterate criminal who found himself getting arrested every 2 years, 1982, 1984, and unfortunately for Bernadine and William Horn, in 1986, Stephen Vian was living at home. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery Insomniac. Stories to stay awake by. Sleep tight.
Kinda Murdery Insomniac is created, researched, edited, produced, and hosted by Zevon Odelberg, with opening theme by Niall Madden and art by the Djinn of Leng. Available now on all podcasting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.